February 3rd, 1945. Over Berlin's darkening skies, the unthinkable was unfolding. 1,400 American heavy bombers, 950 fighters, and 15,000 airmen had been assembled. Their payload, 2,500 tons of high explosives bound for the heart of the German capital. It was a secret order from the highest American ranks, one that some Army Air Force commanders could barely stomach. This wasn't going to be precision bombing of military targets. This was going to be something else entirely. What was about to happen next is said to have made dropping the atomic bomb just a little bit easier. The order came down. Berlin. Jimmy Doolittle scanned the list. Rail yards, Gestapo headquarters, the Reich Air Ministry. But above all, it looked like a civilian city. And it felt wrong. He picked up the phone, his voice tight, and called General Karl Tui Spatz. Doolittle, usually composed, snapped. He cursed hard, slamming his objections down the line. Bombing civilians wasn't what they'd trained for. This wasn't precision. It was wholesale destruction. But Spatz stood firm. He listed Berlin's critical targets, then dropped a bombshell of intel. The 3rd Panzer Army was about to push through the city. General Eisenhower himself approved the mission. The bombers would fly. Berlin would have to burn. The Reich against the ropes. By early 1945, Nazi Germany was caught in a vice. The Red Army hammered them from the east. Allied forces surged from the west, and the once mighty Luftwaffe gasped its final breaths. Berlin, both symbol and nerve center of Hitler's crumbling Reich, still stood defiant, though increasingly battered. The head of RAF Bomber Command, Sir Arthur Travers Harris, had predicted this moment years earlier. In 1942, he declared, quote, "The Nazis entered this war under the rather childish delusion they were going to bomb everyone else, and nobody was going to bomb them. At Rotterdam, London, Warsaw, and half 100 other places, they put their rather naive theory into operation. They sowed the wind, and now they're going to reap the whirlwind." They had struck Berlin repeatedly since 1940, as RAF night raids pounded the city. Harris was blunt about the cost of breaking Berlin, quote, "It will cost us between 400 and 500 aircraft. It will cost Germany the war." The city itself had become a desperate, overcrowded hub. As Donald Miller noted in his 2006 book, Masters of the Air, Berlin now housed approximately 3 million refugees, saying it was the result of, quote, "part of one of the greatest human migrations in history." As February 1945 dawned, the United States Strategic Air Forces were searching for a decisive victory. Historian Tammy Biddle would later characterize their targeting choices that month as revealing, quote, "an almost desperate quest for a decisive use of strategic air power." At the forefront of this quest stood Lieutenant General James H. Jimmy Doolittle, commander of the 8th Air Force. Doolittle, already legendary for leading the 1942 Tokyo raid, now commanded thousands of bombers and fighters. When the order came down for the February 3rd Berlin mission, targeting the Friedrichstrasse railway station in central Berlin, Doolittle's reaction was swift and furious. They were targeting civilians. This violated everything Doolittle believed about American bombing doctrine, which emphasized precision strikes against military and industrial targets, not area bombing of population centers. Seething, he contacted General Karl Tui Spatz, commander of U.S. Strategic Air Forces in Europe. The conversation was heated, but Spatz was unmoved. Berlin contained critical targets: Gestapo headquarters, the Reich Air Ministry, active rail yards, and intelligence suggested the 3rd Panzer Army was moving through the city. What's more, with Soviet forces closing to within 130 miles, a massive strike could help break German resistance. Though personally conflicted, Doolittle was a soldier first. He returned to operational planning and approved the largest American bombing mission against Berlin. The decision came with full backing from high command. General Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, had long placed his trust in General Spatz, who oversaw strategic bombing. Eisenhower later wrote, quote, "On every succeeding day of almost 3 years of active war, I had new reasons for thanking the gods of war and the War Department for giving me Tui Spatz." Though Major General Curtis LeMay had moved to the Pacific, his innovations still shaped every bombing mission over Germany. At 36, the youngest U.S. Major General had transformed air tactics with 3 key methods. First, the combat box formation. B-17s flew in stacked layers. their 10 to 13 50-caliber machine guns creating overlapping fields of fire. Alone, a bomber was vulnerable. In formation, they became a fortress. Second, bombers never deviated on the final run. Despite heavy flak, any evasive maneuver risked scattering the payload. Crews were trained to fly straight through the barrage. Third, only the lead aircraft, equipped with a Norden bomb sight and an expert bombardier, made targeting decisions. Other aircraft dropped their payloads on visual cue or toggle release, ensuring tight bomb patterns on target. By February 3, 1945, these were standard for Doolittle's 8th Air Force. I hope we get Hitler today. The scale of Doolittle's operation dwarfed anything attempted before. Over the course of February 3, 1945, more than 1,450 heavy bombers, approximately 1,000 B-17 Flying Fortresses and 450 B-24 Liberators would strike targets across Berlin. Their escort consisted of 950 fighters, predominantly P-51 Mustangs with their distinctive bubble canopies, and Rolls-Royce Merlin engines pushing them to speeds of over 400 miles per hour. In total, 15,000 airmen from 42 bombardment groups across 3 air divisions would participate in the mission. Doolittle had revolutionized fighter escort tactics, allowing the Mustangs to range ahead of bomber formations and engage Luftwaffe interceptors before they could threaten the bombers. While the Germans could theoretically field up to 1,600 aircraft, a mix of Messerschmitt Bf-109s with their 1475 horsepower DB605 engines and Focke-Wulf FW-190s with BMW 801 radials producing 1,700 horsepower. Most of the remaining pilots were inexperienced replacements with fewer than 100 flight hours. The real threat remained Berlin's integrated air defense system. It stretched 40 miles wide, longer than the entire width of Berlin, with overlapping batteries of 88mm and 105mm guns, many radar-directed, with effective ceilings of 35,000 feet. The system also included searchlights, decoys, and fire-marking systems to direct concentrated barrages. Before dawn on February 3rd, British de Havilland Mosquito light bombers conducted reconnaissance and weather sorties, mapping paths through turbulence and cloud formations. As the sun broke the horizon, the sound of thousands of aircraft engines revving up echoed across East Anglia. Ground crews worked frantically in freezing conditions, checking final systems as airmen clambered aboard their aircraft. Each crewman was bundled in electrically heated suits connected to the aircraft's 24-volt system, protecting against temperatures that could plunge to minus 50 degrees Fahrenheit at altitude. First Lieutenant Robert Delorier, co-pilot of a Boeing B-17G-75VE named Purdy Chili, recalled the strange calm he felt during mission preparations, stating, quote, "We confronted the cold, the fog, the mist. We especially felt the cold. Asleep, awake, on the ground, in the air. We were always cold." When the crews learned their target that morning, Delorier remembered a fellow airman simply saying, quote, "I hope we get Hitler today." At precisely 8 a.m., the first B-17s thundered down runways across England. As Technical Sergeant Raymond H. Fredette watched, he remarked on how, quote, "the massive armada became airborne. Fancy Nancy took off and crossed the North Sea in an endless procession of planes, neatly arranged in battle formation. The number of bombers was something beyond the imagination. But not all would reach Berlin. In the 388th Bombardment Group, disaster struck early. First Lieutenant Perry Powell's B-17 lost control in turbulence and prop wash, colliding with another fortress, Maud Maria, piloted by First Lieutenant John McCormick. The impact sheared open Maud Maria's fuselage, hurling navigator First Lieutenant Ray Woltman into the sky without a parachute. McCormick and 2 others bailed out successfully and were captured. Most of the rest of both crews perished in the collision. Powell's tail gunner, Joseph Bancroft, survived alone. Thrown clear when the tail section separated, he parachuted into German captivity. The mission continued, minus 2 bombers and 15 men. Perfect bombing conditions. It took over an hour for the entire force to form up into the massive aerial armada that would soon darken German skies. What began as a cold, wet English morning would become, over Berlin, a day with, quote, "ceiling and visibility unlimited." Cavu in pilot parlance. Perfect conditions for a bombing raid. The clear visibility across northern Germany would make navigation simpler, but would also eliminate cloud cover that might have offered protection from flak and fighters. As the formations pushed deeper into German airspace, the first signs of resistance appeared. Delorier, co-piloting the Purdy Chili, described the moment his bomber came under fire as, quote, "Imagine somebody throwing rocks against the side of a metal building, and that's what it sounded like. The shell blasts and black puffs of smoke came in threes. They bracketed our aircraft, on one side, above us, and then on the other side. By 9:30 a.m., the first bomber groups approached their initial points and began their bomb runs. The Luftwaffe, though depleted, responded with everything available. Messerschmitt 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s clawed upward to intercept, and more dangerously, jet-powered Me-262 Swallows, with their twin UMO 004B turbojets giving them a 540-mile-per-hour top speed, slashed through formations, too fast for most gunners to track effectively. But Doolittle's P-51 Mustangs, ranging ahead and around the bomber stream, intercepted many attackers. Dogfights erupted across the skies, with the distinctive sound of the Packard-built Merlin B-12 engines of the Mustangs mixing with the higher-pitched scream of German power plant engines. From behind the 34th Group, a German fighter dove directly through the combat boxes of bombers, ending up ahead and to the left of the formation. First Lieutenant Charles Alling of the 34th witnessed what happened next, saying, quote, "It did a pirouette on its tail, like a ballet dancer, and then exploded. We flew through the mass of exploding metal, a piece of which tore into our right wing. Somehow, all the planes in our group flew through the remains of the German fighter and survived." First Lieutenant Theodore M. Mike Banta described the tension, quote, "As we flew toward the target, each succeeding battery of flak bursts moved closer to us. This is when the sweat begins. Will we reach bombs away before the anti-aircraft gunners make the final correction that puts their bursts in the middle of our formation?" At approximately 10 a.m., the first bombs fell in Berlin. Technical Sergeant Raymond H. Fredette captured the moment, exclaiming, quote, "Berlin, Berlin. The very name of the city pounded on my brains. This was the heart of Naziland. This was the city where Hitler had preached his defiance to the world. This was the city where the throngs had shouted Sieg Heil, but today it was the shriek of falling bombs and the rocking explosions that were heard throughout Berlin." The precision of the attack was remarkable given the conditions. Major government buildings, military installations, and infrastructure nodes were hammered relentlessly. The People's Court took a direct hit during an active trial session. Nazi judge Roland Freisler, notorious for his shouting tirades and summary executions during the aftermath of the July 20th plot against Hitler, fell victim to the raid. As the courtroom exploded around him, Freisler was struck by falling masonry, the Reich's most feared legal executioner, eliminated in seconds. Rail yards, administrative centers, and military staging areas across central Berlin absorbed the brunt of the attack, but the surrounding civilian districts were hit hard as well. Entire city blocks vanished under cascading high explosives. Berlin's civil defense network, already strained by years of bombing, struggled to respond to multiple simultaneous emergencies. Amid the firestorm, Major Robert Rosie Rosenthal's lead B-17G from the Bloody 100th Bomb Group took a direct hit. Rosenthal had already completed over 50 combat missions when most crews were rotated home after 25. He was in the co-pilot seat beside Captain John Ernst. Their fortress was the lead ship for the 3rd Air Division, one of the most critical positions in the entire armada. As they approached their target, flak tore into the aircraft. The number 1 engine, a Wright R-1820-97 Cyclone radial producing 1,200 horsepower, erupted in flames. The impact damaged multiple control surfaces, and the fabric covering the ailerons began scorching away. 2 crewmen were hit by shell fragments, sustaining fatal injuries. Thick smoke poured into the cockpit. Ernst glanced at Rosenthal, who motioned forward. They would complete their bomb run despite the damage. If their bombs missed, the entire division might scatter their payloads, potentially causing unnecessary civilian casualties. They maintained course until the lead bombardier, First Lieutenant Eugene Lockhart, released their payload through the Norton bomb site. Other groups followed the signal, bombs falling in tight, devastating patterns. Rosenthal's B-17 lurched violently after absorbing another hit, then began losing altitude. The bomb bay doors cycled open again on their own, a sign of severe electrical system damage. With England now 600 miles away and no chance of return, Rosie transferred formation command to the deputy lead aircraft and turned northeast. hoping to reach Soviet lines. He ordered his men to bail. Most crew members jumped successfully. Rosenthal remained at the controls, ensuring no one was left behind. As he reached the forward escape hatch, he saw an airman lay lifeless, wounded by shrapnel. Rosenthal jumped. Of the 13 aboard, 10 would survive captivity after reaching the ground. Rosie had led his final mission, as Berlin burned below his parachute. The long way home. As the massive bomber stream began its withdrawal from Berlin airspace, the damage assessment was already clear. Berlin was burning, and multiple targets were destroyed or severely damaged. But the skies remained perilous, and not all of Doolittle's bombers would make it back to England. Stardust, a B-17 flying on the formation's edge, took 2 separate flak hits as it veered away from the target area. The impacts tore through the fuselage and severed a critical fuel line. The crew managed to keep the 33,000-pound aircraft airborne, but disorientation and instrument damage left them uncertain of their position. With fuel rapidly depleting and their course compromised, they had no choice but to attempt landing in Soviet-controlled territory. The B-17 made a successful crash landing with the crew intact, despite violating orders against crashing into Soviet-held areas. After repairs, Stardust eventually returned to England, one of the rare bombers to survive a forced landing. Another unnamed fortress, aircraft number 4297960, serving as the lead squadron's camera ship, was crippled by German flak during withdrawal. The explosions knocked out both the number 2 and 4 Wright R-1820 engines simultaneously, and the B-17 began rapidly losing altitude. The crew fought desperately for control as the bomber dropped below 15,000 feet. The pilot fought to maintain control, but maintaining flight became impossible. The crew bailed out over Feuersternwerde, Germany, moments before the aircraft crashed. All survived, but were captured by German forces and spent the remainder of the war as prisoners. The Challenger, another B-17, had successfully delivered its payload over Berlin, but came under attack during withdrawal. The bomber was intercepted by an Me-262 jet fighter, which scored hits on one engine with its 30mm Mark 108 cannon. Amid the worsening damage, the crew fought to maintain control, but the engine fires spread, compromising the aircraft's structural integrity, and Challenger was forced to ditch in the frigid North Sea during the return flight. The impact claimed pilot Robert Long, radio operator Fred Mackey, and ball turret gunner Jack Coleman Cook. 6 crewmen survived the ditching, including Edward Field, who owed his life to Cook's sacrifice. Cook had ensured Field could bail out, while the rest of the crew battled the growing fire before the aircraft sank beneath the waves. The final tragedy of the mission struck the crew of Bluegrass Girl. This B-17G, piloted by First Lieutenant Lewis Cloud of the 486th Bombardment Group, was completing its 35th mission, the magical number that meant rotation home for every man aboard. They had survived the Berlin Gauntlet untouched by German defenses. The crew was jubilant as they crossed the North Sea and approached England. In celebration, one airman retrieved a Very pistol, a handheld flare launcher, and began firing colored signals from the waist gun position. Their triumph was short-lived. One flare discharged inside the aircraft, igniting materials in the fuselage. The fire spread rapidly through the oxygen-rich interior. The crew fought desperately to control the blaze, but only 2 of the 9 crew members managed to bail out before the bomber crashed and exploded. Bluegrass Girl became the mission's final casualty. Beyond Berlin. The February 3rd raid marked the beginning of the end for Germany's integrated air defenses. It showed that the U.S. could project overwhelming force deep into the Reich's core, hitting military and political targets with precision. But it also signaled a shift. Allied bombing would now escalate into campaigns of outright devastation. Between February 13th and 15th, Dresden was annihilated. Unlike the targeted Berlin raid, Dresden's bombing triggered a firestorm that destroyed much of the historic city. Allied aircraft dropped 3,900 tons of explosives and incendiaries, creating temperatures over 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit. Around 25,000 civilians lost their lives as the city was reduced to ash. In the Pacific, destruction scaled even higher. On March 9th and 10th, 1945, 300 B-29s struck Tokyo in a low-level incendiary raid tailored to its wooden infrastructure. Flying between 5,000 and 9,000 feet, they dropped 1,665 tons of napalm, thermite, and white phosphorus. The firestorm took out about 100,000 people and leveled 16 square miles. By comparison, Berlin's February 3rd mission remained within conventional targeting doctrine. Berlin endured another major raid on March 18th. This time, the Luftwaffe mounted a more organized defense. Losses exceeded those of February 3rd, as 28 Me-262 jets and conventional fighters struck bomber formations from multiple angles. The engagement proved that even in collapse, Germany's air defenses could still inflict damage. The February 3rd raid achieved its goals, disrupting command hubs, crippling rail and industrial capacity, and worsening supply problems on both fronts. For weeks, Berlin's infrastructure operated at minimal levels. Nazi leadership, increasingly detached from reality, withdrew further underground. Casualty figures remained disputed. Allied estimates reached 25,000 civilians, while German sources reported fewer than 3,000. But the physical destruction was undeniable. Entire districts lay in ruins, reinforcing to civilians that no part of the Reich was beyond Allied reach. The raid validated the deep penetration strategy of mass bombers with fighter escort, showcasing the 8th Air Force's growing operational autonomy. By 1947, the shift was formalized with the creation of the U.S. Air Force as an independent branch, highlighting air power's role as a decisive force in modern warfare. The February 3rd assault cost lives and aircraft, yet it accelerated Nazi Germany's defeat. 3 months later, Berlin fell to the Soviets. Jimmy Doolittle's massive airstrike, though he had personal doubts, played a decisive role in the Third Reich's collapse.